welcome back to It's All Her, the podcast. I'm your host, Geordie Lucas. I'm the founder and editor of It's All Her. I was an actress in a previous life and I'm a mum to a toddler. I've got a lot going on and I have a passion for helping women live simpler, better lives. For the latest in lifestyle and entertainment news, head to itsallher.com. AJ Clementine is the social media sensation known for openly sharing her transition experience and her LGBTQI+ advocacy. She is smashing through glass ceilings and breaking down stereotypes in the fashion world, having modelled for the likes of Bonds and David Jones, and she has just released her debut book, Girl Transcending. This was an interview that I was really excited for, but also particularly nervous about. I wanted to get this right. I am the first to admit that I'm still learning, but as a mum, I want my daughter to grow up in a world that is friendly to all races, genders, and sexualities. I want her to exist in a world where she is safe to be whoever she is. And not just safe, but loved and embraced. I live with an extraordinary amount of privilege. I am a straight white female. I've never faced any sort of prejudice based on the way I look or who I choose to be with. And I believe that people with any type of platform, and especially a publication like I have with It's All Her, it is our responsibility to advocate for anyone who has faced judgment for simply being who they are. I really do believe that by us sharing their stories and championing this community, the world will become a better place for them and the generations to come. So here is my chat with the incredible AJ Clementine talking about her book, early life, and the gender confirmation surgery that saved her life. AJ Clementine, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast this week. You've just released your book, Girl Transcending. I've read it and I absolutely loved it. It's sort of a memoir, but I also think it's going to become a bit of a guidebook for young trans people. I'm sure you're so proud of yourself.
Yeah, I am definitely. That was one of the main things I had in my back of my mind is I definitely wanted to mash that together, like what you just said. I want it to be a guide. I want it to be a source of information for people who are trans and also anyone who is a teacher or a parent and wants to just understand a trans person, their experience just a little bit more, because we literally don't have much to go off.
And I guess this was going to be something that I brought up later on, but how do you feel about sort of being a bit of a teachable moment? Because I mean, for me, I guess I was a bit nervous coming into this interview. I didn't want to word things wrong. And I think that that's a big thing. People want to be able to say the right thing and do the right thing, but we won't know unless people like you tell us. But how do you feel about sort of being that educator?
I guess that like the way that I see is that we literally all are learning and just trying our best. So as long as we're correcting ourselves or just acknowledging the fact that we don't have all the answers before we even talk on something, then that's the best way that we can have that discussion, is just knowing that like as long as we don't come into a conversation without hurting someone's feelings, or knowing that if there is a point where we can correct each other, then that's fine, without it becoming something that turns aggressive or someone gets frustrated or starts to lash back out if they hear something they don't like. I guess, I don't really see myself as like a teacher kind of role.
Yeah.
I see it more as like, I guess more of like a older sister who lived through it a bit, like I've had a bit more years to live through it.
Yeah, okay. So in your book, you sort of set the scene that from as early as you can remember, you felt that you were born into a male body, but that you were female. What are some of your earliest memories of feeling trapped and that you weren't born into the right body?
The one that really sticks out for me kind of goes hand in hand on like the first moment that I like experienced a panic attack as well. And I was like 9 years old, and I loved doing the school choir at my school, but it was mixed. And I didn't really think about that aspect because it was literally just I was doing the choir and I just had lots of fun making new friends through that. And there was a moment where there was a few kids from our choir that was being selected to do it more competitive. And I was selected as one of those kids to go and do it more competitive. And they took us to another school. And I remember walking to the room and it was just a group of boys. And
Okay.
in that moment, I just realized that like, this is what I'm being seen as. And it
Yeah.
was just scary because I didn't truly put the pieces together and I didn't really understand boy and girl until that moment. And everything just kind of fell into place. The fact of like things were grouped, sports were like grouped sometimes, and all of
Yeah.
these kind of things that just like made me realize that I wasn't developing like every other girl. And I didn't know how I could communicate that, but I knew that there was something wrong. And I
Mm-hmm.
felt like I was going crazy and that I felt like for me, I felt like I should be like locked away or something because I'm having all these crazy thoughts on becoming a girl, waking up and literally praying each day to wake up the next day as a girl. As a kid, I was literally just hoping that someone was listening, that I could get that wish. And I guess it was just that point onwards, it just sent like a shock through my system to realize that I should start tweaking the way that I was because
As in to try and conform
yeah, yeah,
to,
yeah,
yeah,
to
okay.
definitely try and conform and start to change my interests. And around that same time as well, like I just thought that I should stop hanging around with all like the girls as well, my girl group, and start to make friends with some boys and just see if I can do that. Um, but yeah, and I just think that it's kind of when I look back at it, it's is kind of there's lots of strength in my child self to be able to do that, but it's kind of it's kind of funny when I think of it too, because the one friend that I did make at the time, I did write about this in my book,
Yeah.
and I was like, I was so happy, and I was just like, wow, I'm actually conforming, and I have my first friend who is a boy, but it was actually I had a trans friend at the time because she ended up transitioning. And it just shows that the one person I gravitated to was actually a girl. And I know I just felt like that's just a funny situation to be like,
Yeah.
I really did try, but it was just that one person that like had similar interests to me and they ended up being trans themselves. So
Yeah. So it was actually a teacher who sort of planted that first little seed. You say in your book that they passed you an article about a trans girl overseas.
yeah, so I guess with that whole narrative with a teacher really did flip in that situation because when I was younger, I was told by teachers that well how I was feeling and what I liked wasn't great and that people were
Yeah.
going to not like it and they tried to separate me and literally tell me that I shouldn't be doing those things. And I was confused by that because my mum said it was okay and everyone else in my life said it was okay. Even my older brother who didn't like any of that kind of stuff and was just,
Yeah.
your typical boy was like, it's fine, do it if it makes you happy. Like I want to
Mm.
smile. But then these teachers that didn't really know who I was kind of taking it on their responsibility to try and change how I felt. So it was
Why do
very
you think they were doing that? Do you think that they were trying to save you from being like bullied, or what do you think that their logic was?
I definitely think like looking back, it was their way of thinking that they were doing good,
Yeah.
that they thought that they were preventing me from growing up and being bullied or being attacked or something in that kind of way. And I guess because they had the lack of knowledge of trying to understand it,
Mm.
they just thought it was strange. They're like, girls this, boys that. And that was it.
Yeah.
Um, I guess I know when I look back, I kind of didn't really know what he saw because it wasn't like I was at that point where I was socially transitioning or I was introducing certain things in my life to feel more feminine, because
Mm,
him doing that helped me to do that. So I guess it was just, he was basically going off energy, or just what
yeah.
he perceived that I was going through. And yeah, that was one of those moments that if I didn't have that moment, I don't know how or what I would have done without it.
Yeah. You go on to sort of explain this sort of tug of war that you have, where sometimes you thought, yes, this was it, and then you would find something on the internet. You talk about a scene from The Hangover that was kind of like, oh, is this, really, can you explain that sort of tug of war that you had going back and forth, trying to work this out for yourself, whether this was
Yeah.
something you wanted to do?
Yeah. So definitely, when I had the Kimpetrus article, I held on to it. I put it up in my room and it was literally on like my vision board as something as I wanted. But then at the exact same time, there was movies like The Hangover where a cis man hooked up with a trans woman and then vomited when he found out that that was a trans woman.
Mm.
And seeing that was just adding to that internalized transphobia that I had, which I was slowly cracking through and starting to accept that part of me. But then it was just like, no, like I can't have that. Like, how am I supposed to be something where I will never find love because people literally are disgusted by it? And also, it was also, there was that, and then there was also like every single other narrative that I would try and find. I would search trans people in film, and they were villains. They were the comedic
Yeah.
relief. They were everything that has kind of changed today. Like there's still very limited trans people in film and TV, and in books and stuff like that. But I guess it's adding a human element. But there was just nothing human about any trans character that we ever had in history, and there just wasn't any justice like
Mm.
put into that character. And when we did start to get narratives, for example, there's the Danish girl, and like for me watching it for the first time, like I thought it was a beautiful film, but for me it just existed in that film. Like it told a great story, but then at the end of the day it didn't really help the community because it was a cis man playing a trans woman. And it
Yeah.
just it added to that sense of it was a man dressing up for a role, and that's it.
And then
And
at the end of the day, he can take that off and he can live his
yeah,
life where he experiences no prejudice at all.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It was just a role at the end of the day. And for me, I could sit there and be like, that's a beautifully done story of an actual trans woman who lived and is actually the first documented trans woman that we know of. Um, but anyone else that watches the film that doesn't really understand trans women or has their own perception on how they view trans people will just literally see, oh, it's just a role, it's just a dressing up kind of thing. And that also added to the sense of like, how am I going to be seen as legitimate? Like, how am I going to be taken seriously if that's what Hollywood literally thinks we are too?
Yeah.
And won't even let us be in the films. They won't even cast us.
Can you tell me a bit about getting to that point then where you transitioned? And you speak in the book about socially transitioning. In terms of like the social transitioning, is that sort of reintroducing yourself as a woman? What's the process?
I guess like when it comes to transitioning, it's all up to the trans person on what they want to do in terms of how they want to navigate their transition. But
Yeah.
for me, socially transitioning was literally the only option I could do at the time because I was way too scared to go through with the family court law that was around at the time.
Yeah.
You had to go to family court in order to get hormones if you were under 18. So that was just really scary to me to even start that conversation being a teen, and I didn't want to be seen as a criminal. That's all I thought, court criminal. So
Yeah.
for me, it was literally just to socially transition. And I started by growing out my hair, introducing makeup, starting to just feminize my appearance in ways I could in terms of style. And I I found comfort in that. And it was something that like I held on to because it made me feel like I was still contributing to my transition, even
Mm-hmm.
though I wasn't able to medically do it. But there was moments where it was validating, because if I left my town, my hometown, and went to the city with my friends, we would go shopping, and the retail staff or just people that we would interact with would see me and use she, her pronouns, and they would
Yeah.
not even question it. And for me, it was just kind of like, wow, they literally see me as myself. And they didn't even ask me. They didn't even ask me what is my preferred pronouns. They're literally just seeing me and, being like, yeah, that's a girl.
Yeah.
And my friends were kind of always like, oh, that was a bit strange. Like, why didn't you correct her? Like, why did you not say something? And for me, it was kind of like, I didn't really know how to tell them at the time. Um, but I knew that was just like, oh, I don't really care. I just kind of was just like, oh, I don't really mind. Like,
Yeah.
I am kind of achieving that kind of look. I told them it was more like a look and this is what I wanted. I never really
Mm-hmm.
said that I'm trans and I'm a trans woman. But I didn't really say that because I felt like it was something that I couldn't achieve yet. I felt like it was, if I said it, I would not hold much weight to it. I feel like I wasn't at the point to actually be like, I'm a trans woman, because I didn't feel like I was one. I didn't feel like I was a woman yet. I didn't have anything that validated that besides just the outward things I was doing. So, yeah.
So did you end up having a conversation with your friends and family?
Not really. No, I just literally told them that, like, I treated it more like it was like an alter ego. Like that was my other personality. And they would kind of question it and be like, oh, so it's like drag, like you want to do drag. And I was like, no, it's not really dressing up. It's still me. And around that same stage as well, I guess, like it was becoming more prominent because one of my friends did like bring it up with me and sat down at like a sleepover and said, like, are you trans? Like, do you want to start transitioning? Because I fully support it if you are.
Yeah.
And I told her that like I kind of shut it down because I didn't want anyone else to know. So I knew that I could go to her and talk about it, and I did later on. But at that moment, I was just like, no, like not really. But it was literally just a trial period. I didn't know how the world would perceive me like that. Another example was I had like an acting class outside of school. Like it was one of my classes. One of the classes, I just full wore what I wanted to wear. I dressed up, and I said it was for a character. And one of the characters I was portraying was actually trans. And I wrote that in like her character story and backstory. And I told my teacher that. And so I showed up into the class in character. And I guess like the whole class they weren't even fazed by it. And they were all using she, her pronouns, and they didn't really they didn't really care. Like it was just like, I was just like, oh, okay, like this is AJ and this is like what she's doing. And the only person in the class that had something to say about it was a kid who was in the closet.
So do you think he was projecting his insecurities onto you?
Yeah, he was definitely projecting on like what because I mean he does drag now, so
yeah,
I'm like so happy for him. But at the time he wouldn't let it go. Like he was very persistent and kept questioning me like why I was doing that, like why did I show up looking like a girl and all this kind of stuff like that. And he was doing it to the point that people were uncomfortable. Like people were moving away in the class. They didn't want to be a part of the conversation. They were just like, and when I look back, I understand where that was coming from, because when I think about how I was when my friend questioned me for being trans, I was at the same, being like, why would you say that? Like all this, like really, really scared. And I was projecting the fear onto my friend. But the turning point of that situation was one of the guys in my class, he saw that situation happening and he moved and sat next to this other guy and just started trying to direct his attention somewhere else. I'm
Mm.
trying to shut it down, which I thought was really kind because that was the first ever situation where I've had some cis straight boy stand up for me and was just like,
Mm.
he just was like, stop it. Like,
Yeah.
leave her alone. Like she's literally just doing what she wants to do. And the
Mm.
fact that he was also using she, her pronouns was just, it was one of those moments that just like, maybe it is possible.
Yeah.
Like it was that validation to be like, I started to switch what I was just saying before in terms of, men would just think it's disgusting and that there will be no way to ever be liked or be someone's crush.
Mm.
And I saw it in that moment. I saw that maybe it is possible. Maybe there is good people out there that won't listen to what they see in the media and they will create or form their own narratives.
Yeah.
And maybe there is room for me to, fully go full force into what I was
Mm.
doing. And that truly added to it. Like that was a moment where it's just like, even though I wasn't on hormones yet, I'm just going to fully do it. And I didn't really tell anybody, but I was just like, I'm going to start, you know, changing my appearance to be more feminine
Mm-hmm.
so that people would just gender me as a girl without me
Yeah.
having to tell them. And that's what I did.
Growing up is hard enough as it is, but you add this layer of what you were going through. So there's your sort of confusion trying to work out who you are, what you want to be. And then you feel like you need to maybe hide parts of yourself. What did that do for your mental health?
It definitely showed myself that and I guess that like that has kind of become part of like my personality in order to protect myself is hiding certain parts or afraid to speak on certain things that I'm feeling just because I was afraid of how people would perceive it. And I'm still learning to overcome that and try and continue that discussion. But I guess because, yeah, I did grow up in a time where it was like you just had to deal with it on your own and not really bring it up and hide it because of the fear of being attacked or hurt. And I guess that's still part of the narrative today. Yeah, it was just constantly living in that fear, especially when I didn't feel passable. If I didn't feel fully feminine or be seen as a girl, I was always on the edge of being outed or scared. Because there was situations where anybody that did know me took any opportunity to try and out me and be like, tell people in public that that's just a boy dressing up. That time in my transition was so harsh and my anxiety, and it still creeps up today where I kind of still feel like I'm in the exact same spot. Then I'm just reminded that's like, no, I'm not. Like I've come a long way. And that's always like one of my main tips as well for anybody, whether you're trans or if you're going through a transformational process in your life in general, is just document it for yourself so that you remind yourself of where you come from. Because for me, having that, like having footage and having photos of how I was before just really adds to the sense of, I'm still that person, but I don't have to be afraid because I'm not them anymore. Like I'm stronger. I have more willpower, and it's a constant reminder of that.
Yeah. The transition process, and you said before you didn't want to have to go to family law court and things like that. How can the system be made easier for young trans people? Because I feel like there has to be some sort of system in place because there is a duty of care to make sure that young people know the process and know what they're doing. But how can we make it a friendlier process?
Yeah, I guess like for me, I was very confused on why it was such a lengthy process when I did start my transition, like having to get approved by a psychologist and all of that kind of stuff in order just to get hormones. I do realize why that's important so that you can actually diagnose it properly. You can diagnose gender dysphoria in the correct way so that like prevents detransitioning.
So detransitioning is,
if someone detransitions, it's when they revert back to and realize they weren't actually trans. Okay. And detransitioning is a very small portion of the rate of trans people. And sometimes people do slip through the cracks, and that's with everything.
Mm,
People get misdiagnosed all the time on certain things, which is why I feel like that process is so important. But sometimes a medical professional will, it will slip through the cracks and they will diagnose someone wrongly, and then that can happen.
mm,
But and at the core of the process, it is so important for a trans person to get hormones as soon as possible. For me, I was already 18 and I wanted it before puberty. I didn't want to go
yeah.
through male puberty, and being a female and going through male puberty was literal torture.
Mm,
So having to go through that whole process was lengthy, but if people knew why, then I guess it would be more easier. Or if people knew what actually had to be done in order to get hormones, it
mm,
would make the process much more easier, and I wouldn't have to feel like I had to do it alone.
yeah.
And especially when it comes to other things, when it comes to transitioning, because like if surgeries, for example, like for gender confirmation surgery, you have to get approved by a psychologist and a psychiatrist, and that's by the World Health Organization standards.
Hmm.
And that's understandable. But I guess when it comes to having that done here in Australia, I'm so thankful that I could have it done in Australia, but it's it still was not fully recognized. Like you can only have the surgery if you are on private health insurance, and Medicare does cover 20% of it, which isn't a
Hmm.
whole lot when it comes to the
Yeah.
whole price of the surgery. I remember like having the conversations with the private health insurance and trying to explain the surgery that I was having and if they would cover it. The surgery isn't even recognized as the surgery as what I was having. Like it was treated as like I was having surgery on my genitalia because I had cancer, or there was a situation where it was burnt or it was mutilated in some sort of way, and that's why the surgeon has to fix it. And for me, even today, that's still the same. For me, it's like that definitely needs to be changed. Like, why
Yeah.
can't it just be recognized as a trans-related surgery? I don't know, it's a flaw in the system that needs to be fixed.
Mm. I just watched your video on YouTube. You
Mm.
documented your gender confirmation surgery sort of journey. And at the start of the video, you sort of say, this isn't just about me. And when you say that it's not just about you, and then you said that you were comfortable answering questions and things like that, where's the line with people asking questions that will genuinely educate them, or them asking questions to satisfy curiosity?
Yeah. Um, I feel like it's like for doing this for a few years now, I realize there is genuine questions and there is just those stupid
Yeah.
curiosity questions. And for me, I literally just treat it as like, as long as I prefer them to ask me the stupid
Mhm.
questions and they do the trans people that they meet in their lives, because trans people don't owe them anything.
No,
They don't owe
yeah.
them that conversation, they don't owe them that information. And I feel like it's onto the people's responsibility that they find it on their own ways. They search it, they use Google.
Mm.
Like we literally live in a day and age where you can literally try and find that information. Because I feel like I've been asked every single question, and if I do come across something that is a bit different, it's like it's the same question but just in a different font. Like it's just a
Yeah.
little bit tweaked. But for me, I feel like there's no dumb question. Like you can ask certain questions, but just a reminder that like, would you ask a cis person that? Just would you ask a stranger that? Like it's just sometimes
Yeah.
there's really no filter when it comes to asking a trans person about something or about surgeries. It's like
Mm.
they just expect the trans person to be open and free about it.
And
And
people are probably more brazen online as well, because they're not in front of you actually asking that question. There's like that
yeah,
anonymity.
exactly. But I mean, that still doesn't stop them, because even before I even had my social media platforms, like when I worked in a retail job, people in the job literally, when they knew that I was trans, would just ask the most craziest, absurd question. Like, really? Like, we're gonna have this conversation now?
Mm.
Like, literally, one of my jobs that my manager asked if I had a vagina, and I was like,
Oh my God. What
Yeah,
is
I
wrong
was
with people?
literally, I was like, wow, like, do you like who asks those questions? And why is there such an obsession with trans people and their genitals? It's just
Mm,
crazy. Yeah, it's just sad in that instance. It was like we should just get to a point where we just treat people equally and accept everyone's experiences, whether they're cis or
mm,
trans, because either way, we have similarities, but we don't have to literally put people on different platforms or tokenize people just because they did something differently or they had to do
yeah.
something in order to feel like themselves.
Yeah. In your video, there's so much love and care and excitement in that hospital room. You've got friends, you've got your mum washing your hair after your surgery, and it's beautiful to watch, but it was also quite a sad reminder that not all kids in the LGBT plus community, that's not everyone's experience.
Yeah.
What difference did it make for you to feel so held and cared for?
Yeah, it definitely did help the experience to feel like there was like a light at the tunnel out of the tunnel. It
Mm,
did make me feel like there was so much more to leave that room and that bed with.
yeah.
And I remember like one of the nurses, like when they first came into my room when I just woke up and there was like flowers in my room, they were just like, wow, like it's that I remember her saying that that was the first time they've seen that many flowers in the room for a patient who's gone through that surgery.
Yeah.
Um, and she even said that most of the time, which is so heartbreaking to say, is that they don't get any visitors. That I just sat there and just was kind of like, wow, like this is so heartbreaking. Like it's one of those
Mm,
moments that like it's not something that we wanted, it's what we
yeah.
need. It's essential.
It's who
And
you are.
yeah, exactly. And that's why I feel like that whole process in which I was explaining the surgery to random people and health insurance didn't really make any sense because just like I felt like it was just I was being villainized in this kind of instance.
Mm,
I wanted something so selfish, which was just literally a basic need. I couldn't live my life without the surgery. And that was just my own experience and my own personal needs that I wasn't truly living until I had the surgery.
so do you feel like the surgery saved your life?
Yeah, definitely. Like I honestly didn't I didn't really see much of my life. I could never perceive my life in the next 5 years. Anyone asked, I was literally like, if I don't have the surgery or if I don't feel complete after the surgery, then I don't know what to really do because it's just I had so much dysphoria day to day from that part of my body. It was just so hard to handle. Like,
Mm,
I would wake up and be like, I would finally be happy and just literally live my life day to day. And I'd go to the restroom and I'd realize I had that body part. And it would literally just be a stab to the chest, like constantly, that no matter what I did, there would always be this constant reminder. And it was stopping me from having basic relationships. I could never pursue something with somebody because I could never be intimate with them as well. And I know like relationships aren't just based on intimacy, but
mm,
to me, when that's like a huge factor in determining how I feel towards someone and I can't express that, it was like a setback. And there was nothing I could really do about it. And it felt like a constant hurdle that I could never jump over.
yeah.
That moment, waking up in the hospital after surgery. And it literally just felt like I just felt like the biggest weight off my shoulders to realize that it was done. I would never have to feel the same way as I did just the day before.
Yeah.
And I just literally activated a new part of who I was. And I could
Mm,
finally breathe and think of other things instead of fixating on that. And what added to that as well, and what added to that narrative was literally the fact that I had love and acceptance around me. I knew that when I left, nothing would change. I would
yeah.
go back to the same friends, the same family, and they wouldn't really, think any different.
It's so, yeah, just watching as a parent, watching that video. Yeah, I thought it was just beautiful. For other parents listening to this, if their child came to them and said, I'm trans, what are some of the sort of do's and don'ts for how to sort of react and approach the
Yeah.
situation and the conversation?
I definitely think that like the big part is like invalidating them or thinking that like their experience or how they feel is temporary, because once that is kind of addressed, there's an instant switch in a child's mind to hide who they are from their parents. And if that's as a parent you want to happen, you want that disconnect from your child, then that will definitely start to shift where they start to do things in a way that doesn't include you. And that's just sad. I feel like that relationship with child to parent needs to be there, needs to be warmth, needs to be nurtured. And they will need at a point like that, even if, they are still figuring themselves out, you can tell them that like, you need to label yourself straight away, but we can work towards figuring out what you need. And what you need is literally, we take the first steps to see a doctor about it. And I feel like it's such a vital point in that child's mindset and how they feel about themselves to not add to them feeling villainized or feel like they're going to be neglected because of who they are as a person. And then also the main one, and this is just one that I've seen continuously, is the notion of their kid dying because of them transitioning, or they're losing the kid that they had before. And that's something that's just like, I know, I feel like it's just so sad that we try and look from every perspective. And I can see why people sympathize with the parents and they'll be like, oh, that must be so tough for them. But we forget to realize that if it's tough for the parents, imagine what it's like for the trans kid. Like they're literally navigating the life in a whole nother way. And the thing to them is that they're not changing. Who they are as a person is still the exact same. Like they're still your child. All they're changing is the way that they're being seen to the world. And that's literally all that's changing, because on the inside, they're the exact same. So having that whole commotion about, they're losing their daughter or they're losing their son, it's sad, because it just adds to the sense of the trans person is doing something to the parent, like they're hurting them in some sort of way, or they're taking something away from them. I guess it's all about, as a parent, removing your own feelings or bias towards the situation and realizing that there could be, it could be worse. You could actually be losing your kid. And then that's something that you could, that's when you can start grieving and understanding that. But if your child is still there, then why are we grieving their loss?
How do you feel about gender reveals?
I was actually talking about this yesterday with my partner, but I feel like it's definitely something that's been glamorized over recently. I don't know if it's something with social media has done that, if they've been always there, but now we're just documented it. But for me, they're like harmless in the sense that people just want to party, but they do add to the sense of all the gender roles and gender stereotypes. Is just like, I thought we're trying to delete them and move away from pink girl, boy blue. I guess it's just, if you just want to celebrate your child, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you're excited about having a kid, like that's literally onto the parents if they want to do that. But just as long as they're not going to push those stereotypes and gender roles onto their kid, then I guess there's no harm in that, because, that's when it becomes a bit, damaging, is when you're really trying to force your kid into a box and be like, you can only do this, you can only do that. And like, that's when it becomes a bit toxic for kids, because they have to always unlearn that. Like, I feel like that's very prominent with like Gen Y and Gen Z, is that we're changing the narrative. And we definitely do realize that the way that we were brought up, children of Gen X, is we know that their generation was a mess, and we know that like we know that like the way that they perceive certain things is just it's messy, because it's problematic. especially when it comes to mental health. Mental health was one of those things that like their generation was zip up, don't talk about it. Like therapy is nonsense. Everything medical is nonsense. And we know, no, you're allowed to get help. You're allowed to talk about your struggles. And it's not narcissistic to talk about your feelings. Like I feel like that's one of the main ones is just like it's okay to be upset or sad. You don't have to always be happy. Like we don't have to portray happiness as the only emotion that we have. We're human. We feel everything.
So you have modeled for Bonds, David Jones. You've just released a book. You've got like 300,000 followers on Instagram. What does the future hold for you now?
I guess like definitely just still being creative and literally doing what like sparks joy. Like I feel like that's what I've done from the get-go, and just celebrating the little things. That's what I love to do, and just kind of living in that princess aesthetic that I like to kind of create online. But for me, like my true passion and where I got into modeling because I wanted to really branch out in the future and kind of work on my skills in terms of that, but then kind of lead into acting and doing that as well and portraying characters and stuff, because that's definitely been something that I've loved.
Yeah. So we're all about keeping life simple and better for women. How do you make your life simpler and better?
I guess definitely the whole notion on we don't need to compete with each other, and every woman has their own experience that is valid and is okay. And I guess especially now that I've noticed that there's a whole kind of debate over a cis woman's experience and a trans woman's experience, and how there's that kind of tension in terms of what a trans woman will never have a full cis woman's experience because they will never have a period, for example. And if we fully fixate on those kind of things, it's so invalidating, not only to trans people, but to cis women who don't have a period as well. It's like, why do we need to nitpick on things that we all experience when we can just all sit at the table and talk about our experiences individually? And being more present and calm with that kind of mentality has definitely helped me a lot to know that I will never be cis. And I wish I was born cis, but I can sit here and listen to a cis woman's experience and hope that they will listen to mine as a trans woman.
Well, AJ, thank you so much for joining us and just being so open and honest. The book is out now. It's such a beautiful read. I'll link it all down in the show notes. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of It's All Her. If you have loved this episode, please rate, review and subscribe wherever you listen, and I'll be back in your ears very soon.